Welcome to Scott. I'm Sister Martina, and we are going to talk today about Pope Pius XII, who governed the Church between 1939 and 1958, and who is, of course, the most misunderstood of all these recent popes. He was an Italian from a high aristocratic family, a man of poor health, actually, but a very impressive personality who inspired respect, and people loved him very much. It's interesting to read the historical sources about that. He had lived many years here in Germany and loved Germany very much, which is a thing I can now understand. Germany has wonderful things. And because of this, some people say he was somehow sympathetic to Nazism, which is just the opposite. Because he loved and knew Germany so well, he saw so sharply the danger of Nazism and how the German people were somehow led, part of it, not all of it, of course, to at least close their eyes to the regime. He was the right hand of Pope Pius XI and great intellectual influence on Pope Pius XI, especially on the encyclicals about communism and Nazism. And he was elected almost by unanimity, and exactly at the beginning of World War II. Whoever knows a bit of World War II can imagine what is this for a man to be elected Pope when this war is just starting. I mean, lives becomes a matter of life and death, and it's very highly complicated to know what the Pope and the Church should do, what he should say, what he should allow, what he should forbid. He even thought about moving the seat of the Church to New York once to get some independence, but stayed in Rome. And he did what he thought was the best to do. He was a very discreet man, and this doesn't help us today because we cannot know what he thought actually. But there are things that we do know, and mostly that he gave specific orders, and of course he could not order it because the person who would obey it would risk his own life, but specific recommendations that the people of the Church, priests, bishops, nuns, would help as much as they could. And they did help. I mean, practically an enormous, the majority of Jews who were saved in France, for example, were saved by people who were somehow in contact with the Church, mostly priests and nuns in schools who saved children. In Poland also. And so many priests, bishops, and nuns have their names inscribed in the Yad Vashem, in the Jewish museum in Jerusalem for the Holocaust. But of course, it's a very sensitive question, and we have to respect immensely our brothers Jews who have suffered so much. And Pius XII was just a man, so we could say, yeah, he could have done here better or different. It's very easy, on the other hand, to speak now and far away from the situation. Good question is what we would have done in his place. But all the thing, the propaganda that he was somehow favorable to Hitler is a thing that actually appeared in the 60s. He was dead already. Through propaganda, disinformation from coming from East Germany, from communist Germany, through a theater's play, and until people even affirm it as if it were a history that he was somehow friendly with Hitler. This is, of course, some childish thing, but the situation is very hard to evaluate, and only time, now the archives are being opened, will help us to see it in a more exact light. That he was against Nazism is very clear. He actually, as I said, influenced the encyclica from Pius the 11th, and that he did all he could, at least he thought he could, to avoid it is also very clear, with peril, of course, for his people and for his own life. We should remember, actually, that at that time, communism was a much greater peril and danger than Nazism. Nazism was something local, so to say. and it was so evil and so clearly against human principles that somehow it was not hard to see that as brutal as it was, it would end. It could not last. The thing that made it so powerful was the high organization of the German army, which really conquered Europe practically. Communism, on the other hand, was already established in Russia since 1917 and is a much, much more subtle spiritual danger, exactly because communism presents itself as something good, as love for the poor, as love for equality, as the heroes of a society without classes, and so on. And we see it so clearly because until today, we have communist countries in the world, and the leftist, radical left propaganda is still there in our schools, in so many things that we see every day. A country like North Korea is still there. We don't know what happens to them. We don't know no news from these poor people, what they suffer every day. So the Pope had just had this very clearly, and for him both systems were we should fight against them. But somehow communism was much more a spiritual danger than fascism or even Nazism, which were things to be won over, but everybody knew more or less that they were wrong. And we cannot forget, for example, that the countries of East Europe, people who had lived and suffered atrociously under the communists, like in Ukraine, millions of people died of hunger, starvation, made specifically by the Soviet government. They received the Germans, when the Germans invaded them, with flowers in the streets. They thought at first that the Germans were coming to liberate them. And the tragedy of these countries like Poland, who fought against the Germans just to finish the war, again in the hands of the communism, is something that we in our Western countries cannot even begin to imagine. And the Pope, of course, had this whole picture. And the great message of Pope Pius the XII is clearly the message after the war. He was a very highly respected person in the 40s and 50s. These years were the golden years of Catholicism, for example, in the United States. The church was growing, full of vocations, very organized, very firm, and very clear in its doings and missions and so on. And Pope Pius XII was universally recognized and very much loved, very much respected as a hero of democracy. His message was, again, democracy, true democracy, is not a dictatorship of the majority. True democracy is actually a spiritual thing, a moral thing. True democracy can only exist where we recognize that good, justice exist. These are moral values, and we fight for them. We fight for freedom, we fight for good, we fight for justice, we fight for friendship and peace among people. And these are moral values where we leave morality aside, and he says, of course, the deepest Christian values. There cannot be democracy. And this is a message that's incredibly modern and incredibly present in our days. Democracy tends in our days more and more to be something pragmatical without moral values. Democracy is simply what, even more now, what the media says, actually, not even the majority of the people anymore, but the media says. And the result is what we see every day in our Western societies. And what he says is true democracy is a moral thing. Only in as much we grow morally, only when we really recognize the existence and freely, individually, in our human conscience, try our best to realize, to make this values present in our lives, then democracy, true democracy, can really exist and can bring us then a free society, a good society, a society where we can have the opportunity to find a real good life. All the rest, extreme right or extreme left, is always a danger exactly to this most human idea, political idea of democracy. We see each other for the next meeting. Bye bye. God bless you all.